Get up, Mr. Friedrich shouted. Be quick about it. Mike groaned as the hammering on his door awoke him from sleep. He rubbed his fingers through his hair as he tried to remember exactly what he'd heard during the night. There had been an argument. Loud voices, Reuben's and Mr. Friedrich's. Had they been part of his dreams or had they been real? Mike shook away the trailing edges of sleep in confusion. He leaned over the basin, splashing cold water on his face and rubbing it briskly with the towel. As usual, a lantern glowed from inside the barn. On Sundays, the animals had to be tended even earlier than during the week. Mike dressed quickly and slipped into the house to join Reuben. Although his stomach rumbled loudly from hunger, he'd eat later in the kitchen with Reuben rather than suffer through a miserable meal with Gunter and Mr. Friedrich. He understood now why Marta preferred to eat in the kitchen. Reuben was pouring full buckets of milk into the large milk can when Mike entered the barn. He smiled a good morning to Mike and worked his usual steady pace, so Mike decided that the argument he had heard was just part of his troublesome dreams and let it vanish from his mind. After Mike and Reuben found clean hay and forked clean hay into the stalls, they went to the kitchen where Mara dished up heaping plates of ham and biscuits swimming with thick gravy for them. If you want more, there's plenty, she said, and went back to work cleaning squash and stringing beans, all the while humming to herself. The salty, creamy fragrance that rose from the plates tickled Mike's nose and made him suddenly aware of his hunger. Without pausing, he gobbled down every bite of the food and mopped up the last puddle of the gravy with a warm biscuit. When Mike finally dropped his fork onto his plate, Marta rested a hand on his shoulder and smiled at him. You did not get a bath last night, so Mr. Friedrich wants you to bathe all over with water in your basin. She winked and lowered her voice. Don't look so horrified. I've heated some water over the fire. Take the kettle with you. Here, this extra towel. The others are busy dressing for the trip to church. They won't see you with the kettle if you hurry. Mike grinned his thanks, grabbed the kettle, and ran up the stairs. He seemed to always be racing, always running, always being jarred from sleep, and he wished for one quiet, peaceful moment. He stripped off his clothes and scrubbed all over. The room was chilly, but the hot water and soap felt good. He dressed in trousers, shirt, and jacket that Gunter had long outgrown. The trousers were much too full, so he pulled them up tightly with a piece of rope he used for a belt. The shirt had been washed so often the material was thin, and the sleeves of the jacket were long, but Mike didn't mind. The shirt was soft, and he could tuck his hands inside the long sleeves to keep them warm. He pulled on his socks, boots, outer coat, cap, gloves, and clomped down the stairs with an empty kettle hidden under the towel until he was safely in the kitchen. Hurry, be off with you. Marta opened the door and shooed him out of the kitchen with a gentle push. The Friedrichs are all in the wagon, ready for the ride to church, and if you're any later, they wouldn't wait for you. The wagon was already underway. Mike hesitated. It wasn't his fault. They wouldn't wait, was it? Then he would sit by the fire and talk to Marta and Reuben, and maybe hear more about river stories and even some poetry. And it wouldn't surprise him a bit if... Do you want to be in even more trouble than you are now? Marta hissed. No, Mike answered. He raced toward the wagon, managed to scramble up the back, and flopped into the empty wagon bed as the wheels jounced and shuddered through the ruts of the drive. And as the horses made a sharp turn to pull the wagon onto the road, Mike struggled for balance but was tossed on his back. He squirmed into a fairly comfortable position and lay back contentedly with his head on the palms of his hands, looking up at the threads of gray and white clouds that scudded over the pale sky. Reuben had said there was a difference in the sky over land and the sky over water. There was so much Reuben had seen that Mike would like to see too. Sit up properly, Mr. Friedrich's voice boomed. Obediently, Mike did, clinging to the side of the hard wagon bed. He wished there was a folded quilt in the wagon to cushion the hard jolts to his backside, but there was nothing besides a large hamper of food, a large folded piece of canvas, and himself. He tucked the canvas underneath his bottom, but it was every bit as firm and uncomfortable as the wagon bed. Marta's a stubborn girl, Mr. Friedrich said to his wife. I think she refuses to go to church with us just to show how she's angry with me for not allowing Corey Blair to see her. Mike held his breath, listening intently. Oh, don't think too hard on her, Mrs. Friedrich said. Marta's more comfortable in her own church than she is ours. She should respect my wishes, Mr. Friedrich said. That's all she needs to concern herself with. He paused for a moment and said, I'm worried that she'll not be as loyal to us as she should be. I've talked to her. Mrs. Friedrich's voice rose as she nervously clutched her husband's arm. We can trust her. There's nothing else we can do. Mr. Friedrich turned to his wife and gave her a long, hard stare before he said, Oh, yes, there's something else. Hans, what do you mean? Never mind. Not the time to talk about it. We'll talk about something else. He began to discuss a new cream separator he'd heard of, and Mike leaned back against the side of the wagon and tried to concentrate. Was Marta in danger too? If Mr. Friedrich couldn't trust her, what was it he had in mind to do? Mike shuddered. He wished Marta would stay away from Corey, but he knew she wouldn't. He'd seen the way she'd bustled around the kitchen this morning. He'd heard her humming to herself. Was he the only one who guessed that Corey was going to ignore everything Mr. Friedrich had told him and would visit Marta while the Friedrichs were gone? With his mind wandering, he thought to himself about himself. Sooner or later, Mr. Friedrich would begin to wonder how much he knew about what they had done, and Mr. Friedrich would come up with a plan to get rid of him. Who'd miss a poor homeless boy? No one. Even Andrew McNair wouldn't question whatever they said about him. How sad, the Friedrichs would sigh. Poor Michael fell into the well and drowned, or that ungrateful boy ran away. Where did he go? We have no idea. Mike shuddered in dread fear for his life, and Reuben, Marta, how was he going to manage to save any of them? Mike's mind was still in turmoil when he heard other horses and voices and realized they arrived at the church grounds. Dutifully, he climbed to the wagon and followed Mr. Friedrich and Gunter at a safe distance into the church. Gunter sat on the bench on the left side of his father. Mr. Friedrich pulled Mike down on his right. And on the other side of the church, Mrs. Friedrich, smiling and murmuring, seated herself with the women. Mike liked the singing. He found himself aching with longing to hear Ma's strong, full voice. Oh, if she were only here, wouldn't everyone in this building know it and be glad for it? Mr. Friedrich nudged him sharply with his elbow, and Mike sang louder, stumbling through an unfamiliar hymn. Thankful when they reached the last note, he flopped into his place on the bench. He tried not to daydream during the rest of the service, well aware of Mr. Friedrich's sharp elbow, but his thoughts kept skittering. The preacher spoke about loving thy neighbor, which Mike decided he'd agreed with. He liked the Blairs, though he couldn't understand why they believed in slavery. Mike thought he knew how it felt to be a slave. He threw a quick sideways glance at Mr. Friedrich, hoping the man couldn't read his thoughts. But it turned out not to be just neighbors, the Blairs and the preacher, the Blairs the preacher was talking about, but everybody. Ridiculous, Mike thought. No way he wanted to love the judge who'd threatened him to Tombs prison, or Mr. Crandon, or Mr. Friedrich, or Gunter. Sure, and the preacher might well have a fine idea what heaven would be like, but man didn't know the Friedrichs well enough, or he'd think twice about this business of loving everyone. When the service was over, people met outside, clustering in groups to talk and laugh. Mike noticed that a number of women were friendly with Mrs. Friedrich, but not too many of the men came to talk to Mr. Friedrich. Two girls with pigtails down their backs stared with curiosity at Mike, but they stuck out their tongues when they saw Gunter and ran away giggling. Some of the women had already spread cloths on the ground and were putting bowls of food out from the baskets they had brought, but Mr. Friedrich glanced impatiently at the sky, which was muddying to a darker gray, and strode over to a cluster of women around his wife. He touched the brim of his hat to them and reached for her arm and pulled her from the group. We'll start home now. I want to get back before it begins to rain. But we haven't eaten, Mrs. Friedrich complained. We'll eat in the wagon. Mike saw Mrs. Friedrich look at her friends with longing. I look forward to this time to talk, she said, her eyes lit up. I just discovered that Evelyn Pitchard and her husband are going to be blessed with their first little one in the spring. We have no time for gossip, Mr. Friedrich snapped. I have no liking for a for a long ride in the downpour. It took only a few moments for Mrs. Friedrich to say goodbye to her friends. Mike climbed back into the wagon bed, and Gunter hoisted the basket up to the front seat. To bolster his courage as they drove down the road toward home, Mike began to hum under his breath. 3 fat sausages, Gunter in the middle. His stomach began to rumble so loudly he wondered if they'd think it was thunder, and he clapped a hand over his mouth to smother the laughter that welled up inside of him. Mr. Friedrich turned his head and motioned to Mike. Here's your share. Come up and get it. Mike crawled to the spot just behind the wagon seat and reached up for a cloth bulging of food. He opened down his lap and moistened his lips as he looked down at the feast of apples, molasses cake, and cold meat. Balancing himself against the dips and lurch of the wagon, he enjoyed every bite of the meal. Although the sky grew darker, it had not begun to rain by the time the horses turned to the Friedrichs' front yard. We could have stayed, Mrs. Friedrich complained. Alma had a new length of blue silk cloth sent to her by her parents in Virginia. I wanted to hear about it and how she would style her dress. Suddenly, Mr. Friedrich pulled up the horses so sharply they had to fight to maintain their balance. Hans, Mrs. Friedrich cried, what are you doing? Mike shuddered at the tone of Mr. Friedrich's voice, which was every bit as low and threatening as the sky, as he demanded, Whose horse is that? Mike climbed to his knees to peer over Gunter's shoulder at the horse that was tied to the hitching post and immediately recognized the spotted gray and gasped. Of course, they'd come home long before they'd been expected. Gunter let out an explosive giggle and said, Papa, you know who owns that horse. It belongs to Corey Blair.